Hello, everyone. Welcome to another digital dialogue run by the Institute for Digital Transformation. My name is 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝘂𝗁, and I'm your host for today's show. I'm a fellow with the Institute and also the host of the Gut Punch podcast, which is hosted on DTBN, the Digital Transformation Broadcast Network that we have here at the Institute. Today, I'm delighted to be moderating an important discussion on brain health, the future of brain health, which is being sponsored by NeuroEM, and we thank them wholeheartedly for sponsoring today's show. Who have the firsthand knowledge of what brain health is, and we're going to explore different facets of it, what that means, and how it matters in this day as we all try to live longer, but don't really know the ramifications of what that means, especially with our brain. So let's get started. So we're going to bring all of our guests on right now. And our first guest is a fellow, I love saying that, our fellow Chuck, who is the CEO of NeuroEM and one of the best conversationalist partners I've ever encountered in life. So Chuck, wonderful to have you here. If you want to share.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. This is a very important topic. And obviously it's one of the things that all of us, as we get older, should be concerned with. So
yes, as we all try to live longer, much longer, hopefully. Okay, our next guest is Patty Meager. Patty, I'm delighted to have you on the show today. If you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Patty Marr, and in my career, I've been involved in technology and investment banking and venture. But today, this is very personal for me. My cap that I have on is one of caregiver. I have my 92-year-old mother living with me. She's actually been, she had a diagnosis. She's been using the NeuroEM technology for over 6 years, and life is good. So I'm here to share from a personal perspective.
Yeah, welcome. Now, and I look forward to hearing all about this. And then our final guest is Dr. 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗁.
I think it's having technical issues logging in.
Okay. So it's live, guys. So this is what happens with live TV, live webinars in this digital age here in our digital dialogue. So I think, before Chris comes on, why don't I sort of start with an explanation of what brain health is. So we all have this common song sheet that we're listening from today. And the information that I'm using comes from a report that was recently put out by the McKinsey Health Institute in collaboration with the World Economic Forum. And I do want to say today that what we're talking about today is ideas, okay? We're not making recommendations. We're not talking about things that people need to do or have to do. This is more of a discussion, really, an intellectual discussion on the brain and where it's going and some challenges that come into play with that. And one that I know that NeuroEM is keenly focused on is that of Alzheimer's. So it looks like Chris is back. So first of all, thanks for being here, Dr. 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗁. And if you could just introduce yourself to everybody, that would be great.
Well, sure. My pleasure. I am 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗁. I'm a former neurosurgeon. I practiced neurosurgery and ran neurosurgery services for over 20 years. After that, I moved sort of into a business entrepreneurial world. I have tremendous interest in brain health, obviously, as a former neurosurgeon, and met up with Chuck and the NeuroEM team, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's get started with the definition. As I said, the definition is coming directly from the McKinsey Health Institute and World Economic Forum report. So they define, and I'm literally reading this, they define brain health as a state of optimal brain functioning, supported by the promotion of healthy brain development and the prevention or treatment of mental, neurological, and substance use disorders in people of all ages. I'm going to go a little bit further with this. The brain health isn't the only thing that we're talking about. It's this concept of brain capital, okay, which has two components: brain health, which I just described, and something called brain skills, which is the foundational cognitive, interpersonal, self-leadership, and technological literacy abilities that enable people to adapt, relate, and contribute meaningfully. And they're equally as critical to societal progress. So it's these things together that are called brain capital. And that's what we're going to talk about today is brain health and brain skills, and why this all matters in this age and time of people living longer as we go forward. So Chuck, if you could just share a little bit about kind of what you're doing in the space, and we'll just go from there.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because, I have to be careful not to allow my personal exuberance to overrule the regulatory constraints I have, right? So, in a big picture context, there's 5 factors that drive brain health: chemistry, biology, physics, environmental factors, and behavioral patterns. And what's fascinating, over the years, we have invested billions of dollars in chemistry and biology, whether it's medicine, whether it's DNA research, whether it's, all the drug therapies that are out there. Chemistry and biology has taken by far the lion's share of investment. A few years ago, people started realizing, wait, brain health also is impacted by environmental factors, right? So we started paying attention to things like noise levels and all kinds of other things that are impacting brain health. And then eventually we got to the behavioral factors, right? Because there is now a clear connection between the health of your brain and the health of your thinking. But the physics side of the equation always didn't get any attention. And by that, I mean, the brain is an electrical computer. It has electricity. It's got physical properties that impact its performance. And that was the focus on the research. And one of the factors is radio frequency interference. It's actual signals, energy delivered into the brain through radio transmitters and things like that, and energy, right? Not foo-foo, like actual energy.
Right.
And in the research that drove the development of this technology that I stepped into about 4 years ago, it was fascinating because it was a random discovery. It was people thinking, gee, let's see if cell phones cause brain cancer, which they don't. There's plenty of research that they don't, and see if they impact Alzheimer's, and they found exactly the opposite.
Well,
So it turned out that the scientific underpinning of what we do is the concept that delivering short pulses of energy in a specific radio frequency spectrum into the brain actually has a positive effect on the brain. It delivers energy to the brain, breaks down toxic accumulations, improves ATP production because it stimulates mitochondria. It's got a lot of actual benefits. And then the question is, well, how does that apply to potentially treating diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia and all kinds of other things? So that, to me, that was the fascinating part. And, with people like Patty, who gave me the perspective of families, and Dr. Romana, that gave us more of a scientific view of the world, and others, we've slowly have started building this platform technology and trying to deliver it, doing testing and confirming all the hypotheses and all the things that we do through the model of getting the FDA to say, yep, you guys actually do that, which they did initially as a breakthrough designation, saying this is potentially a breakthrough, but you still got to go through the whole process. It's a very interesting development. We're not the only ones doing it. There's a couple of other companies in our space that have recognized the same thing, and they're applying technology, physics, to figure out how to improve brain health, right? So
yeah, and I think, we were talking about this earlier, is like, the fact is, I mean, I don't know where the stat came from, but I've read it, is like 1 in 4, I mean, Alzheimer's and dementia is a problem for everybody, but it's even stronger for women, right? So that, I think the data that I saw is 1 in every 4 women will experience some form or some type of Alzheimer's, dementia, that kind of thing. And we are living longer. So you take this stat and you take the fact that we're living longer, and it's one of the things is like, wow, it gives you pause. Chris, could you talk about kind of what you've seen in this space as a doctor?
Well, sure. Actually, I thought your definition of brain health was really very interesting, because there are really 2 parts of that. There's brain capital, there's building brain capital, and getting your brain to be as good as it can be. And that involves prenatal health, early childhood health, development, schooling, education, and as you sort of build your brain capital. And then there's the other side, which is trying to preserve it and trying not to lose it. I mean, quite
Yeah.
frankly, I mean, it goes up and then it goes down again. And you think about, as someone ages, sort of the progressive loss of function. Well, that includes brain function. And so when we start thinking about this as a global problem, we're talking a little bit about Alzheimer's here, obviously, but there are a lot of things you can do to lose your brain function. We talk about in the neurological world, microvascular disease, like the blood vessels not working very well and getting tiny little microstrokes, which you might not even notice, but as they build up, the progressive weight of that leads to what we call it sort of a vascular dementia.
Mhm.
You can minimize that by doing things that are good for your blood vessels, optimizing your blood pressure, making sure your blood pressure is not too high. High blood pressure over a long time has a higher chance of giving someone a dementia pattern through brain injury. Diabetes control, for example. You think about people who have diabetes and you hear about them maybe losing a limb, but they don't heal their wounds very well from poor blood flow. Well, the blood flow is not so good in their head either. If the blood flow is not so good in
Yeah.
their leg, it's not so good in their head. And so you can have problems there. You think about things like deafness. If you lose your ability to hear and you lose your social cues from the rest of the world, you have a higher chance of developing a dementia pattern. Loss of social skills, or the brain is a muscle. If you stop educating yourself, I mean, keep reading, keep learning as you age, because if you stop doing all that, your brain will stop functioning as well. And then, as Chuck was getting into, there's the actual physics. How do you make your cells work well? There are recognized patterns, amyloid buildup, protein buildups, et cetera, which can cause nerves to not function very well. And that's another way in which, if the nerves aren't functioning very well, you can lead into a dementia pattern, which is known as Alzheimer's. And so, a lot of things out there, as we start thinking about treating Alzheimer's, there are a lot of ways to do that. The drug companies and whatnot are all working on ways to minimize that amyloid burden in the brain. And we're working on it similarly from a little different viewpoint. But it's really a global problem. And almost anything that makes your body better will probably help your brain out also.
Right.
Is there, just building on what you're saying, just curious on the global front, is there one part of the world where you guys are seeing Alzheimer's or dementia be more problematic? I mean, is it the US? Is it Europe? Is it Australia? I'm just curious.
It's global. All the data that we see, it's consistent. And it was interesting, even in some of the blue areas, that everybody keeps, the distribution. And what's really terrifying, the distribution is random. It's not, there's no any one clear path that says you do that, you will get Alzheimer's, including genetics, right? APOE is a genetic mutation that people like APOE4. Oh, if you have that, well, actually, no, that's not true either. It is definitely a global problem, and there's no clear one way, one direction that gets you there.
Yeah. Hetty, I'm just curious.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The one thing to remember is that as you have progressive aging, I mean, as you do a better job of preventing death from cancer or other types of conditions, as you treat diabetes better and your diabetic patients live longer, you will get increased amounts of Alzheimer's. I mean, it is a function to some degree of aging, and as the rest of your body lives longer, there's a higher chance that your brain will start showing signs of problems. You mentioned women having a little higher evidence of Alzheimer's than men. I mean, women do live longer than men too, and so as we do a good job in other areas of medicine and preventing death from other areas of medicine, it is important to think about brain health and to focus on making sure that your senior years are quality years and not just quantity years. I mean, being alive and having poor mental function is not how I think a lot of us really hope to live out our elderly years.
Yeah.
So
Hetty, go ahead.
as an example, there's a lot of science behind this, and we were talking about, toxic proteins and all the science that goes into the therapy. A very good example is, when my mom, right before she started on this therapy, she couldn't actually have the confidence to make breakfast. But she wanted to be independent. So she would count out 8 almonds and add to it some toast and juice. She could handle that. After being on the therapy for a while, now remember, she was already living at home with family, exercising. There was a lot of good stuff going on. But when we added the therapy to it, by the end of 6 months, she was able to like plan a Thanksgiving dinner, cook some of it herself, set the table meticulously, and enjoy the conversation at the meal. So those are the kind of everyday outcomes and being able to enjoy life that this science produces in the human brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole idea. It was one of the reasons that I got so passionate about getting involved with this. Is Alzheimer's and brain health is not just a disease; it robs people of their dignity.
Yeah.
And just like Doc said, a guy like me, adjusted for the occasional bourbon and cigar, is supposed to live into my 90s, right? But what's the point of being 90 years old if I can't remember what's going on, if I can actively participate in society? That would be a horrible way. And I've had friends of mine, all the mentors that I saw decline because of that. And that's scary. So.
Well, no, and I just know seeing, I think many of us, considered the sandwich generation. And, you have your kids, but you also have your parents. And aging is tough. And I think aging is tough for the people that are aging, and aging is also tough for the people that are supporting them, as Patty was talking about. And I know from my own personal experience with my folks who are, I always have to think about this, I think 84 and 83, they're still alive and kicking, and, going to, but they're still alive and cooking, and they're still having a great time. But, we made the tough decision last year to move them into assisted living because having a house was too much. And it was very hard because they didn't understand why they needed to do that. And, the kind of loss of dignity, Chuck, that you were talking about, I think for that generation, there is a lot of pride that comes with home ownership and being independent. And when they had to go from their house to the assisted living facility, which is lovely. I mean, they're technically in what they call independent living, lovely. Honestly, much nicer than I thought it was going to be. But it was still hard. It didn't matter how nice the place was. It didn't matter how many restaurants it had or how many activities it had or all the trees and the animals and all this great stuff. But still had to leave their house. And, my sister's a doctor. My sister and I had to have that conversation with them several times about why this is good for everybody. And it still didn't make it any easier. And, they've made the move, I guess about 6 months ago. And they're it's better now than it was 6 months ago. They've settled in, they've made friends, they're mahjong, bocce, bingo, music classes, like all this great stuff, which they weren't getting before, they're getting now. And I think what I experienced was not very different from what many of my friends are going through with their folks. And what my sister and I did not anticipate was they moved from a very large house into a ranch, right? They're in a ranch, they have like a community, like this is the house they moved from. They're going to be good. But what we didn't anticipate was the loneliness factor, right? So my parents were living together in this house, but they were by themselves. And as hard as that move was to assisted living or independent living in an assisted living facility, was that it gives them community and it gives them something to do every day. It gives them places to go every day that they can just go out into the hallway and find their people and do. And I think that whole concept of, and this is something that we explore actually on my podcast, is this idea of social health, right? And this idea of human connection. Can all of you like touch on the importance of that as it relates to brain health? Because I think that's something that's forgotten about, but I think it's so important.
I can take it first if you like. Sure.
Yeah.
It's tremendously important. I think we talked a little bit earlier that the loss of socialization can lead to dementia, depression, a whole lot of bad outcomes, honestly, and that can lead to loss of physical activity, just a downward spiral. And so there's no doubt that remaining active and engaged with a friend group, with peers, with things to do is tremendously important, not only for dementia patterns, but also for psychological patterns as well. And we mentioned before the deafness. I mean, if you do slowly go deaf, you slowly lose that external stimulus and such. So it's just tremendously important to remain engaged. Salute your parents. I think they will probably ultimately be happier and do better
Yes.
than they would have done.
Yes.
It may not have been fun, but they are trading off a little bit of a feeling of independence for probably a much more rich social environment, which I think will suit them well over the years.
Yeah, I agree with you. And my mother's like, "Oh, we're so busy," which, she never used to say when they were living in their house by themselves. And that just brings me great joy. And then she says to me, "I don't really like bingo." I'm like, "No, I know you don't like bingo, but go play bingo, go do my go all this stuff." Uh, and I think part of it too, again, it's like in this transition that a lot of us are helping our parents do is it's also important to laugh, right? And it's also important to just like share. And I know I've been through some crazy health stuff in the past couple of years, and I never ever lost the ability to laugh. And I think that's so important with all of this is like, acknowledging that it isn't easy aging and acknowledging that there are challenges that come with it. But I think, community and a sense of friendship and family is so underestimated, but so incredibly important, at least from my own experience. Patty, could you talk about like working with your mom, like what that's been like for you? I'm curious.
Well, on the whole family and social, I mean, it was so important. She was already with me, but the next generation, she had lived in our home. So she had helped raise my two daughters, and they decided that out west was where they wanted to be. So we literally sold the home, picked up, moved from Connecticut all the way out to Oregon, and we are now in the same community with both of my daughters, the son-in-law, and there was a great grandchild born on her 92nd birthday. Let me tell you, just having all of that, where she's over there once a week for dinner, the baby comes over here to play with her. Because of all this social interaction, her life is great. And hence my life is great. I get to still see my friends. I can do Zoom. I can travel back. But being in a community where we have all this family interaction makes all the difference in the world. It keeps you young.
Yeah, I think it does. And I know on my podcast, we talk about like stories of resilience, right? And for someone, it's focused on, it's called the Gut Punch podcast. And so it's usually like, what's your gut punch? And one person said her gut punch was retirement, which I thought was fascinating. And she actually now coaches people on the transition from working to retiring. And part of that is this concept of social engagement. And she's really focused. She has to like help people, realize they don't have to check their email every morning when they first wake up, but it's important that they go out for a walk. It's important that they, have leisure activities. And it's important that they figure out a way to re-engage and get out there and be out there and have that sense of community. And it was funny. Her name is Sandra Menzies. And it was just so interesting that was her transition. It was based upon something she had gone through. And, it just got me really thinking about, my parents and their transitions. And I think seeing for me to, as you said, Patty, like for me now knowing that they're, for the most part, happy, even though my mom doesn't like bingo, they're good, and them being good gives me such joy. Right. Because I knew, or I've known, there's only so much that I can do. And learning that, I think, and the other part of this is like being the caregiver, right? As you are, and as I kind of am, learning that or understanding that a lot of other people are going through it, I think is helpful. And I know for myself, like I would find myself in situations where people are like, "Oh, how's it going?" I'm like, "Oh my God, there's all this stuff going on with my parents." And then someone would say, "Oh, me too." And we would talk about that and finding for me commonality. Cause the thing is, it's not just hard on the parents, it's hard on the caregiver. And that's just a really, I don't know, Patty, how your experience.
Well, it used to be, we have to do that intentionally now. Yes. I had my way of doing it, going into getting community through an assisted living yet another way. it used to be people didn't move more than, 5 or 10 miles from wherever they were born. Community was built in. All the relatives and friends were always there. Now we have to make life decisions and changes. And then the caregivers have to learn to rely on other people. You can't do it all. Let the family take that elderly person. It's going to bring joy to them, to the next generation, and it allows that caregiver to go off and do something else for an evening or a weekend. And we just have to learn how to work that way.
Yeah, I agree. And Chuck, I was curious, like in your in your work and what you've seen and working with different people, what are you seeing on this front?
Well, it's interesting because if you go back to my 5 factors, the
Yeah.
environmental factor is a big impact, and caregivers, having a caregiver is important. But what's really fascinating is we have finally, after all these years spending money on chemistry and biology and eventually environmentals, we're now coming to the factors that actually impact patients, and there's all kinds of experimental technologies and things like that. But we're finally recognizing the burden and the need for the caregivers. And there's some great caregiver resources, support networks. We NeuroEM is part of something called Startup Health, Alzheimer's Moonshot program, and we frequently have people talk about how do you get the caregivers to be supportive. But it's interesting though, caregiver has multiple perspectives. Like there's the giver that their job is to make sure that this person stays healthy, they keep
Yeah.
engaged and do things. And then, I mean, at the progressions of the disease, the caregiver literally is, doing bathing and doing all kinds of other things, right? That are very different. And most of us are not trained, nor do we have the disposition to do that, right? So
Right.
preventing getting to that point is extremely important. And it's interesting you mentioned the impact on women. It's true. Alzheimer's and dementias have a larger impact on women than they do. And it's a double whammy because women tend to be the majority of the caregivers for other people with Alzheimer's. So it's definitely it's finally being recognized, and how do you do that? And there's protocols now and expectations on, and how give your caregiver breaks and what do they need to do, and educating them, and if they're family, how do you deal with that? It's definitely an interesting
Which is why I'm always on, Chuck, you've got to get this technology to market because, as a family caregiver, my mom basically improved and has held steady. She's 92 years old. I don't have to do the most of the physical taking care. I mean, at 92, you can't reach your feet, so you might have to help a little bit with that. But she can take care of herself mostly. And I just want for other family members to be able to have that kind of a relationship with their parent. We still can just talk, enjoy each other's company. I help her a little bit, cue her a little bit, and she at 92 is mostly taking care of herself. And all of this neuromodulatory technology, I think, is going to be really helpful from
Chris-
several different.
Yeah, I agree with you. Chris,
okay.
did you want to add in here? I'm sorry, Pat. Chris, did you want to talk?
Not really. I mean, certainly Patty has much more knowledge of caregiving and caregivers than I ever have, outside of to say that certainly in my work and in all medical physicians' work, the role of the family is tremendously important to the outcome of the patient. And in any sort of treatment, tremendous family support will help that patient do better.
Yeah.
You can't do it all alone. And so you want your treatments to be within reason, as simple as possible, as minimally invasive as possible, as non-debilitating to the patient as possible, not just for the patient's sake, but also for the sake of everyone who's around them. I mean, it takes a village, as they say, so for everyone who's around them, you really like to be um, um, minimizing the side effects of any sort of treatment that you do. That's just tremendously important, just because you're not just burdening the patient. I mean, the side effects of treatment don't only fall on the patient; they fall on the family as well. So, tremendously important to be cognizant of that. That every time someone is driven to the doctor, probably someone is driving. Oftentimes, someone is driving them. Anytime you go for a treatment, someone may be helping them, and it's just tremendously important.
Yeah, and I don't think that can be undervalued, underappreciated. Again, I feel that um, many people view it as a singular journey. It's not. Everyone goes through this, and I think a lot of people don't feel that they have people that they can talk about it with. But the reality is, a lot of people are going through it. Especially if you're Gen Z, you're going through it right now, or Gen X. Sorry, I made myself Gen Z. If you're Gen X, you're going through it right now. And Gen Z will go through it at some point, with Gen X, honestly. But Patty, if you could talk more about like your mom, like what are the things that at 92 that she and you do together that brings you both joy? Like I know, so I'll say, I'm gonna start off. So for my mom, like my mom still loves to go out to lunch, right? She loves to go out to lunch. She's not, I'm from Philly, so we don't go anywhere. I don't know. I'm from Philly, therefore we don't go anywhere fancy. I don't know where I'm from in Bucks County. Like we just go to like the local, place for a burger. But my mom enjoys getting out of the independent living facility and just going somewhere else, not all day, but for a couple of hours. And she enjoys like oddly like watching rom-coms. Like who knew? Like my sister discovered this. My dad tends to fall asleep, but my mom is like keen on watching the rom-coms, or like she watched Bridgerton with my sister. So like that like is a fun little thing that we've discovered about my mom. And Patty, I'm curious about your mom. Like what are some of the things that you guys do together now that she enjoys?
Well, aside from watching those favorite shows, like everyone should watch Golden Girls. It's really fun.
Yes. Love that.
I really don't mind doing that together because it is funny. But
Yeah.
we still can do all the things that we basically always enjoyed doing. So for Mother's Day, we went with our two daughters and a mother-in-law, and we all went and saw the Broadway touring show of Mamma Mia.
Yeah, that's
We,
fun.
when we want to go to the beach, she comes with us. We have to make certain arrangements, but she still loves the beach. I mean, she did have, she actually did fall and broke her leg, and so she needs a walker, but you can find ways to get around all that. So she'll still get in the car and go with us over to the Pacific Ocean and enjoy that. Or just locally, yep, she likes to go out, and because she does have hearing aids, and so she can hear a conversation, we'll go out to dinner. We'll go out with just the two of us, or we'll go out with the family for a birthday, and she can enjoy that as well. So honestly, what we've done for fun, it's changed a little bit. I think it would change even if you're perfectly cognitively healthy at 92. You have to make some physical arrangements, but you can keep living life. That little baby comes over, and that's one of the most important, sources of joy for her. And, she actually takes him for a little ride on her walker because he insisted. So just lots of fun ways to enjoy life. And she's right there. She loves to read. And we can discuss, like before she had the treatment, she'd read, one of her favorite authors was 𝗚𝗏𝗶𝗴𝗶. Very silly, very simple. And then she might not even remember what she read. But then after the treatment, she picked up Winston Churchill's Gathering Storm, and then proceeded to tell me all about what it was like. She was angry. It's like we could have avoided World War II if we just saw the signs. And then we took her to the museum, the Holocaust Museum, and we saw the FDR area around the Washington monuments. And she told us what life was like actually living through all of that.
Yeah.
So keeping your brain health allows you, I mean, it's kind of giving me chills. You can pass along all of that experience. Her long-term memory is rock solid and has never changed.
Yeah. No, I love that. I will say, and a game of Scrabble is always a fun family favorite in the house too. And my mom will be like, she'll even say, my dad too, will be like, oh my God, they say I'm actually using my brain, right? Which I just love hearing them say that, and then my daughter is inevitably the one that knows like the word that no one thinks is an actual Scrabble word. And um, Chuck ahead.
It's funny because Patty and her mom were my touchstones when I first looked at this company, and I wanted to talk to people and understand what it meant. And Patty sends all of us pictures every now and then. Once a couple of months, a picture. My favorite one of all is her mom walking a grandchild in a stroller, wearing an experimental device because we designed it with that idea in mind and all the things that we did based on that. And it's one of my favorite pictures. It was like, yep, there she goes. She's doing it, and no restrictions because she got something that we designed. It does give you a different sense of pride in what we're working on, right? So
It does, and I know, Chuck, you had mentioned this before that, there are a bunch of companies kind of in this area looking at this research, and there are a bunch of experimental technologies that are still, out there. Can you talk about, again, and this is just a discussion, if you could just share some of that with us, I think that'd be great.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The one of the challenges is that in order for any of us in the space to make medical claims, you have to have the right to do so. And the only agency that can do that is the FDA, right? So everybody spends millions of dollars in studies trying to prove the data. So the FDA, rightfully so, I'm not disagreeing with that, say, yes, you can clearly say you treat that. It takes a lot of data and a lot of money. But what's interesting is there's two main approaches right now. And I mean, we're all kind of following the idea that, and this is our device,
Right.
right? And it's an experimental device, but the idea, the design here is that you either entrain the brain, which is the approach that like 𝗗𝗶𝗴𝗶𝗁 Therapeutics has,
Right.
or Synaptica, that you certain frequencies delivered through either the optic nerve or the auditory tracts entrain the brain to improve its functionality, increase the efficiency, and do all the things so you can help the brain heal itself and expel the toxic proteins that are building up and things like that. Or there's our side that says, nope, I'm going to do a direct action because I'm going to send a specific, I'm going to target a specific component in the brain to do that. So those are the two main that are now using physics. The idea that the brain itself it's a machine. It has electrical components. It's got mechanical components. It's got connectivity. It's got 10 years ago, we didn't even know what the lymphatic system was. And we discovered 10 years ago that the brain's got a mechanism that flushes out all the toxic protein accumulations from processing. Well, we didn't know that. So there was nobody understood the mechanical aspects of that. And now we're finally doing it. So there's a lot of experimental technologies focused on that. And then there's other ones that are trying to figure out how to mechanically get past the blood-brain barrier, because the brain is a highly protected component of our anatomy, right? There's thousands of years of evolutionary development that say, hey, don't let pathogens get into the brain, do all these other things. And then we want to deliver drugs into it, or we want to deliver, therapies. Well, we got to figure a way around that. So there's so much experimentation right now. Unfortunately, still the majority of the funding for that goes to the pharma solutions, but it's changing.
That's right. Yeah. Chris, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chuck's exactly right in regards to there was 20 years ago, I think it's safe to say that most people thought that the buildup of amyloid was a byproduct, a result of you getting Alzheimer's. You get Alzheimer's, and as a result of that, somehow all this protein builds up. And then as time has gone by, it's become a lot more clear that the buildup of this protein is likely what causes Alzheimer's. So instead of being an effect of Alzheimer's, it's actually the cause of Alzheimer's.
Right.
And so as a result of that, then it becomes more obvious. Okay, we all probably build up this protein at different rates, just like we might build up vascular disease in our heart at a different rate. Some people may get vascular disease when they're 55, and some people may be 100 and have no heart problems whatsoever, right? Because we all build up maybe some of these vascular buildup in our heart or in our vessels at different rates. In a similar fashion, we can build up some of this amyloid protein in our brain at different rates. And this may be some of the reasons why some people may be really very mentally clear at 95 years old. And some people may start showing signs of a dementia pattern in their 60s, it's just different rates. But as a result of that, as you start to understand that maybe some of this protein buildup is really what causes mechanically our cells to not function very well, then the treatment is, okay, we need to think about how do we get rid of this protein in the brain? And it's not so easy to do. There is a blood-brain barrier. The drug therapies are out there. They are modestly successful. They have some side effects as well. And so from the medical side of things, the idea comes about how do we try to get rid of this protein as much as possible with minimal side effects as possible. And that's really where the space we've been working in. How do we mechanically try to get rid of this protein? And as a result of getting rid of this protein, we should make the cells function better. You'd lower the amyloid burden in and around the brain cells, then optimally, if indeed it is a fact that the amyloid itself is causing the brain cells not to work well, this is causing you to have the Alzheimer's pattern. If you can lower that amyloid burden, then you should have the cells work better and minimize or stop any sort of Alzheimer's progression. And so how do you get rid of that amyloid burden as easily as possible? And people are working on it in different ways. We think ours is probably going to be the best ultimately, but as Chuck had said, we need more research to prove that anecdotal reports like Patty's are repeatable and not just a statistical fluke or something of that sort.
Yeah.
I chose, knowing more about it than I ever wanted to. In the early days, she made progress when I came home from a trip. Just being social was what she needed. But as I saw her get where I just knew she was going to fall off the cliff, I had chosen not to put her on the medications because I knew what the side effects were, and I let her go on until we could get a hold of this new treatment, because I know, while the drugs are really good and they kind of change the downward trajectory, they give you a little more time, it's still a downward trajectory versus these newer, and it's not just neuro-EM, there's several new types of neuromodulatory treatments that they don't have those same side effects, and you can improve, and then you can hold steady without, the nasty side effects of drugs. So her improvement really came from the neuromodulatory stuff.
That's great. I'd love it if we could talk a little bit about some of the wellness solutions that are currently in the market as it relates to all of this. Chuck, you're laughing, so you get to.
Okay, so here's the thing. Unfortunately, you can go spend $150 on Amazon and buy crystals to treat Alzheimer's.
Of course you can.
Right?
Did you get the eye roll?
Right? And then you get the ginsunized for free. The challenge that we have out there is that unfortunately wellness is so poorly defined.
Yes.
And that we looked at what are the wellness solutions out there. We found a device from a certain country that people buy in the US for $25,000. Has no medical claims, no tests, no scientific data. And it was fascinating because one of my partners in this venture and I were testing it, and he put it on and put the lids on, and we're watching the monitor do things. I was like, oh, okay, I wonder, maybe it's doing something. And without him knowing, I went behind the computer and unplugged all the leads. And the thing kept going. And it's like, so you look at these things and you're like, there's a lot of things out there that make no sense. What's interesting is, we license our technology for a wellness product, right, to be out there in the marketplace. But to do it right in a wellness solution, it's a $280 billion brain health devices market. People spend billions of dollars on buying devices and buying nootropics and buying all kinds of things. So there is a lot of wellness solutions out there. Some of them are legitimate. Some of them truly have an impact. Some of them backed by science. Some of them are, like I said, you buy a combination of crystals that would treat your Alzheimer's disease. So the challenge in the marketplace is, how do you do that? Now, and one of the reasons that Dr. Romana is actually associated with that is, and so is the rest of our advisory board, they're all people like him, right? A lot smarter than I am, is because we're disciplined about the science. Even when we license the technology for a wellness device, this is the science. This is what we can say. This is what we will say. This is what the FDA would let us say. It's a challenge. And it's interesting, a lot of companies in our space right now are trying to figure out, do I go put a wellness device in the market? Because if you're a 50-year-old male or female and you're concerned about your brain health in the future, but don't have a diagnosis or don't have anything, you can't get anything prescribed, even if it's approved by the FDA. So what do? How do you do that? And the idea of the wellness market is perhaps a prophylactic approach to brain health is finally catching on. And I think that's the next area that you're going to see a lot of movement and investment.
And I think, you hit on something that I know I've explored a lot, is like this concept of wellness and that evolving topic, because, we were so focused on physical health, and then there was a shift to mental health. And now there's discussion about social health, but really it's all of that makes wellness. And I think that's a whole nother digital dialogue conversation. So I think we have about 10 minutes left. And so I wanted to see if there were any questions from listeners about today's show. Otherwise I can keep asking questions, but okay. So I guess there aren't any right now. So let's just continue with this conversation. So I guess, Chris, if you could talk more about, like I said, so on my podcast, on the Gut Punch, we're exploring now this concept of wellness, right? And what we're seeing is there is this need for social health, and the World Health Organization actually also published a study on that. And social health, this need for human connectivity, some of which resulted from the pandemic, but just other things in general, like is a growing concern in society. In your experience, in your work, what do you think is the biggest challenge for older folks to get that social health? Is it access? Is it motivation? Like, what have you seen in your work?
Well, I think it's multifactorial. I mean, I think that if you physically feel like you're not as capable anymore, you don't go out as much.
Yeah.
And if you don't go out as much, you may be a little bit more shut in, a little bit more depressed, and a little bit more withdrawn. And so I think that you want to almost force yourself to remain active, even if you don't feel like it. It's like you need the days you don't feel like exercising, the days you need to exercise the most.
Yeah.
And similarly, you want to make sure that you are in an environment where you are always having something to do. We talked about your parents, for example. Okay, tomorrow I've got bingo and mahjong. Okay, that's a schedule, right? So
Yes.
you have to get up and get going. You can't just sit in your chair. You have things to do tomorrow. And I think that keeping a schedule and forcing yourself to be on a schedule is really important, because it prevents you from being able to sort of just take a day off, and that leads to another day off and leads to another day off. But if I go back to one more thing we talked about earlier about the whole wellness side of things, prevention is tremendously important. If you start seeing signs of a dementia, for example, by the time you see that, you've really lost a lot of brain function already, right?
Yeah.
And it's far easier to prevent brain loss than to get it back once you've lost it.
Yeah.
And so I would really just, before we leave here, and this is a little bit off the question you asked, I would really just be tremendously encouraging of everyone who's listening to this to be always thinking of their overall health, their blood pressure, if they're diabetic, their diabetic control, their social life, social activity, remaining involved in educating themselves, because it's really much easier, like I said, to not lose brain health than to get it back. and we talk about wellness in our world and our product. Uh, it's a different market, so to speak, than trying to treat someone who has Alzheimer's. But it's really not that different in terms of the overall brain health and global brain function area. So socially, tremendously important to remain engaged, to have a schedule, to have a reason to get up each day, to
Yeah.
have things you need to do each day. That almost forces you to keep going and prevents you from being able to sort of regress into a self-contained, alone, depressed, not physically active, not socially engaged person. So keep a schedule and keep active.
Yeah, I remember growing up, my grandfather on my mom's side, every morning he started off by doing the New York Times crossword puzzle. And then he would move from that to, there used to be this card table they would keep in the house, and there was always a puzzle on it, right? So usually it was like 1,000-piece minimum, so that you would dump the box over, and then, and then during the course of the week, the weekend, however long I was there, everyone would stop and try to put part of the puzzle together. But it was fun because it was a family thing that we did, so like that aspect of community, but it also got the brain going. But to your point of the schedule, every day began with the crossword puzzle, a cup of coffee and the crossword puzzle. And he would sit there for hours until and then he'd move on to the regular puzzle.
Yeah.
I think it's just so incredibly important. And it gave him also this feeling of fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
Of the success that he had accomplished something. And I think that that's so important, as we age. Patty and Chuck, anything you guys want to add to this?
I got something that's interesting. You and I have been in conversations at the Institute about AI and the impact of AI.
Yes.
It's fascinating to me. The brain is a muscle.
Yes.
If you don't exercise it, it atrophies. And if it's not healthy and there's disease, it doesn't function, right? It's a generalization. It's a broad enough. It's directionally correct, right? And if you think about some of the things that we're seeing now with AI, people offload cognitive processing to the AI. And at some point you're like, wait, if you're not exercising your brain, if you're offloading that to an AI, then your brain will atrophy. And there's enough initial evidence to show that that's having an impact. So I think the other challenge we're going to have around brain health is, how do we find ways to reload cognitive processing on our brains when we're becoming so used to the availability of AI that can do a lot of the cognitive processing that we used to do? To me, it's maybe a subject for a whole different dialogue, but that's the idea of brain health is getting more and more complex, right? It's no longer just diet. It's not just physics and exercise. It's all these things that are now playing a factor. And I'm going to quote this. A friend of mine I have a bunch of neurosurgeons and neuroscientists, and they've all become friends over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But one of them made a point, because I said something about a project that I worked on, a very complex digital project. And he looked at me, and he's a very polite man, but he kind of laughed and says, "You realize the brain is the most complex entity in the universe." And I took a step back. I'm like, damn, I never thought of it that way, right? But he's right. I mean, there's so much we don't know about the brain, and we're adding more things that are removing our ability to keep it healthy in our daily lives. I think it's becoming an existential thing that we got to deal with eventually. So
Yeah,
And
no.
on the wellness side, and this is a technical term, as for all of those caregivers out there who are caregiving family because their parent has Alzheimer's or some other dementia, we're like a gazillion times, maybe not a gazillion, but many times more likely to have that disease when we're older as well. So now, when you're not noticing it, as these new wellness therapies come out, really, really important. Get going on it now, because it's important for your future. I hate to be the Debbie Downer on that, but I know that I'll be taking a close look at that.
No, I think that's so important. I mean, I think as we're all saying, like, the future to mental health is activity, right? The future to brain health is mental health, and that's activity. And a sense of community, a sense of engagement, as Chris said, so like a schedule, like something to do every day, and that sense of accomplishment that comes with that. And, recognizing that as we age, things change. And I think being aware of that and being cognizant of that now or later or wherever you are in your journey, it's just really important to remember, like, if as Chris said, like the data when you don't want to exercise, that's when you exercise. I know I have moments where I'm like, okay, either nap or go for a run. And I usually try to, instead of taking a nap, someday the nap comes out. But I think that's just Chris, that was such a great thing, is like, when you don't want to do it, that's when you should do it. And I think, the reality is we all age and our brain ages with us. And so what can we do at whatever point in life we're at now to keep that brain functioning and healthy and have optimal brain health? So fascinating conversation. So Chris, Patty, and Chuck, thank you for being here. Thanks for all these incredible insights. And thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Digital Dialogue. We'll catch you here next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining Digital Dialogue. Look for more episodes at noon Eastern Time on most Tuesdays of every month. Can't join the live session? You can watch the replay anytime on our YouTube channel.